We're talking about leadership. This whole session is about leadership. This aspect of leadership is about how do we lead through influence. It's about arming ourselves with tools on what we can do, how we can do things. And primarily this session will focus on the how to lead through influence. How do we influence others? What are some of the tricks of the trade, if you will? It's really about persuasion. How do we persuade people without commanding them to do something, without demanding that they do something, getting them to march to the same tune that we happen to be playing? That's what we want. We want commitment in some way, shape, or form. So most of this session will focus on tools, various kinds of tools. Here are things that you can use in order to influence people. Because influence is one of those really nebulous areas. It's not a command. It's not part of control. It isn't in the hierarchical situation. You can't just say my position will influence you. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And we'll look at that. So command and control actually has some pretty strong negative impacts. We all know that. We've all been subjected to it. So first we're going to do is put this into context. As I said, it's about leadership. So let's look at leadership again. What have we been saying about leadership? And what we have been saying is that leaders are found throughout the organization. So whether you're frontline or executive or somewhere in the middle, we are all leaders. That's the key assumption. And executive and director, so-called at the top, we lead by establishing corporate vision. We talked about that this morning and in other sessions and in other contexts. We develop new business opportunities. So there's a very strategic approach to leadership. We set clear and workable goals. And then we aspire workers to lead. That is, we don't want them just to follow, we want them to lead in their own right. So it's an inspirational thing. As managers, we lead by operating well-managed departments and businesses and divisions. We lead by implementing efficient systems, processes, clarity around that efficiency. Efficiency may be one of our goals, but it's not the only goal. It's actually a means to an end. It's about being a leader. Managing customer and supplier relations. So there's that strong relationship upstream, downstream. It's about building employee competencies through training. So once again, it's a focus on those whom we want to lead as part of our leadership capability. Because leadership is not just me, it's everybody I work with, everybody who reports to me, everybody I report to. Supervisors. We lead by running integrated operations. So we put the act together, make it a whole end-to-end enterprise, complying with those standards, policies, regulations. So there's a whole compliance dimension to leadership. It's deploying. This actually, as logisticians, a very important key issue. It's because we are deployers. We deploy operations, we deploy inventory, we deploy networks, and so on and so forth. We work towards schedule. It's also about developing teams and employee strengths. So if you notice each time I describe these different approaches, it always ends up with the people with whom we work, so that they could become leaders in their own right, because that gives us strength as leaders. And if we're frontline, our approach to leading is really doing the work on time, doing it on spec and damage-free. It's maintaining resources and handling the equipment the proper way. It's a healthy and safe work environment. It's also about working collaboratively with our fellow employees. So once again, we end with, in each case, other people. It's all about collaboration. It's about building on strengths. It's about training and being competent. And in the end, it's about inspiring those whom we lead. The capacity to lead is really built on the foundation of responsibility. We looked at this in a different context, but responsibility is the core here. Whatever our specific job or role in the company, whatever our title is, whatever our rank is, we are responsible for the success of the organization as a whole. We're responsible for the cross-functional process areas, whether it's purchasing, transport, distribution. We're responsible for different business units, whether it's the procurement department, the distribution department, the DC, distribution center, the accounting department. We're responsible for the teams we work with, the teams we want to cultivate. We are responsible for sourcing teams, scoping parts for manufacturing operations, for example. The IT implementation team, often enough we're involved in the ERP, not only selection choice, but also the management of the implementation of an ERP. We are responsible for ourselves, ultimately, as individual workers and people who are on career paths. Our careers are what we create. It's not what someone else gives us. And so the responsibility falls to us. We are responsible to do certain things. For example, to lead the organization. That means think strategically, think critically, because not everything is always right. So taking a critical stance is just as important as just simply complying. As a matter of fact, it's probably more important because that affects change. We're responsible to the organization to develop strategies, to initiate and manage change, to develop corporate culture. So we get back to that issue of culture, that what I call that fuzzy area that is actually integral to success. We're responsible to the organization to support the strategic projects that come out of our strategies. We're responsible to manage performance. This never goes away. That's integral to everything we do. Why? Because we have cross-functional areas that we deal with. So staff performance, function performance, process performance, business performance, financial performance, and then work processes. Now, whether that's KPIs or whether that is the bottom line of the P&L, whether it's working with the balance sheet or the cash flow, there are multiple ways of handling and dealing with that. But that's what we manage. It's about performance. We manage the operations, whether it's in a business unit, in a DC, or a department. Ultimately, those operations are about managing customers. Or I should really say, we don't manage customers, we manage customer relationships. We manage demand. All right? We negotiate with suppliers, we facilitate meetings, we manage projects, we manage transactions. We discuss at various times this whole issue of facilitating meetings. You know, meetings tend to be the bane of our existence. How much time do we waste at meetings? Well, actually, meetings are not a waste of time. If they're facilitated properly, and if the objectives and goals are real, and if the outcome and the output is significant, then a meeting is worth the time and the effort. It's about having the skill to facilitate a meeting. So facilitation skills are actually very different from management skills. And at some time we can look at that, and I think we should look at that. We manage to develop people. It's interesting, we don't manage people, we manage their development. We direct team members. We coach people. We develop team process, because team is not just a bunch of people sitting around. There's a whole process associated with that. That's the structure of what a team should and could be. We engage others. We influence others. Now, there's one of our key issues that we're going to look at more closely this morning, and that is about influence. And then, of course, we have to manage ourselves as individuals, our time, our work. We solve problems, we make decisions, we think creatively, we learn to learn, we communicate. The learn to learn thing is a very interesting issue. We often enough think that learning is just automatic. Actually, no. Watch a child. A child actually has to learn how to learn. And it's not about learning it properly, it's just the whole being open to whatever the possibilities are. That doesn't come automatically. It's about curiosity, it's about opening ourselves to opportunity, That's a little less of what a child would be dealing with, but it's more what we would be dealing with. Learning is not automatic. Learning is something we have to learn to do, which is part of the humility issue, which is opening ourselves up to possibility. Having said that, the capacity to lead is built on that foundation of responsibility, as I said, but the level and type of responsibilities correlate to the various career paths that we find ourselves on. For example, if we're on a career path towards senior positions, senior management, executive, if you want to use that term, we need to embrace strategic responsibilities that support the viability of the entire company. And it's focused on inter-organizational relationships along complex supply chains to create customer value. So this is the value creation side of business. Not just good operations, not just efficiency, but the effectiveness in the marketplace in terms of our relationship with our customers. As managers, there's a need to embrace the structural responsibilities. Well, this is where efficiency becomes the norm. Therefore, it's about supporting the viability of the business unit. It's focused on developing and managing those vendor networks and those customer channels, distribution channels, if you will. It's about sustaining the customer service, which is the delivery of value, if you will. So there's a connection between value and the efficiency of delivery, or customer service in another term. Supervisors, we need to embrace process responsibilities. It's that support of the viability of the business processes. It's focused on integrating internal operations with speaking to external operations, if you will. It's really about procurement, inventory management, distribution, transportation as supply chain logistics professionals. And then finally, at the operating or frontline level, we as workers or those who work with us, we're expected to embrace tactical responsibilities to support such things as the transactions involved in any of the work that we do. It's focused on tactical and transactional operations, and it's about buying, it's about controlling inventory, it's about order processing, it's about materials handling, it's about warehousing, distribution, transportation. So, leadership is fundamentally about change. That is the fundamental approach that the Logistics Institute takes to leadership. Core to leadership, everything about leadership is about change. It isn't about rank, it isn't about title, it isn't about what we actually do other than within the context of change. That's the constant, change. Envisioning a future different from the present. It's about developing organizational structures. It's about implementing processes to achieve that willed future. It's about sustaining the strategic alignment of multiple cultural factors, a global outlook, a commitment to succeed, the willingness to collaborate and communicate. And ultimately, it's about having the right people with the right skills and talent and the right jobs. Or as Jim Collins would say in the book, Good to Great, it's about having the right people in the right seats on the bus. Great analogy and something to think about. So, having said all that, that's the context now of our discussing in a more focused way the change challenge around influence. We start by looking a little more closely at what is change. And coming out of Harvard Business is this understanding or approach to change, which indicates that there are two types of change in a broad brush approach. And these two types of change are, on the one hand, reactive change. Reactive change is closing a performance gap in the organization. It moves an organization from the what is state to the what should be state with a higher degree of urgency. So this is that urgent change. This is the burning platform kind of change. It is more directive control over the process. So in dealing with this need, it's about being directive, all right? So that's the kind of power and leadership that's expected. However, there's something called proactive change. Proactive change is closing an opportunity gap, not a performance gap, but an opportunity gap for an organization. So this moves the organization from the what is to the what could be, not should be, state. So there's a lower degree of urgency, and actually it's less directive. This is more influence-oriented, all right? So if we begin to parse what we mean by change, and we create, or at least think about these two types of change, these categories, we can see where our tools and our toolbox can have certain things in it that will allow us to be effective in a change process as leaders. So reactive, proactive. Looking at the reactive, this is a direct approach. This is the must-do approach. And so the characteristics of the directive approach are urgency. We've got a crisis. We've got to deal with this, and we've got to deal with it now. High dissatisfaction. We've got a problem. We've got customers who are walking away from us. We've got suppliers who don't want to deal with us. We've got processes that are falling apart. Whatever the issue is, the burning platform. There's low resistance. That in itself is interesting. The low resistance is that we all are going to walk down this path because this is such a crisis. We're not going to resist that change. That's what we mean by low resistance. It isn't people laying back and saying, well, too bad, so sad. There's nothing we can do about it. No. People are coming to the fore and saying, we have to do something about it. And that's everywhere within the organization saying, what is going on? How do we solve this problem or deal with these issues? And we've got to do it now because there's an urgency involved. And therefore, there's a high support level. People will rally around the crisis. And this is actually quite normal, whether in business or at home or our children become sick. And we don't just sit back and say, don't worry about it, right? No, our children become sick. They become the focal point of everything we do. We have more than enough stories in our history to say, when someone is pinned under a car, it's the amount of adrenaline that it takes in order to pick the car up as an individual or a group of individuals. And you say, it's not possible, except that in an emergency, it's amazing what can be done. Those of us who are firefighters know exactly what that adrenaline effect is. Of course, the change agent is the person who knows what's going on. Having said that, the change is clear. The second type of change is more about persuasion. It's proactive change. It's influence-oriented. It's about persuading people that maybe we should do this, or maybe we have to do this. But there's no burning platform. It's not a crisis. There's a high need for commitment to engage in the change. We actually have to convince people to join us. Just because we need a new process doesn't mean we're going to have people rallying around us. They're actually going to say, you got to be kidding, I don't want to deal with this. Leave me alone. What we have done in the past is perfectly okay, but we have to convince people that a new process is better than the old process. Change is actually not that clear. A new process, well, isn't that nice? It's a nice to have. Well, a nice to have is not necessarily something that's going to look good. It's not clear. Change then becomes complex because there's resistance. So what we're dealing with in persuasion is overcoming resistance. The change agent needs the support of key constituents. So it doesn't matter how well informed you are as the change agent. If you don't have people willing to work with you, you're not going to go anywhere on it. It's just not going to happen. And so it's about influencing people to convince them to follow us. That's a leadership challenge. So the capacity to lead is about influence, power, and action. And what we're focusing on for the rest of this session is influence. All right. So Obviously, influence is about convincing others. So that's the most direct approach to influence that I can talk about. Well, what does that mean? Typical of me, just because I make a simple statement doesn't mean it's simple. How do we parse it? How do we unpack it? What is the meaning associated with that very simple 5 words? Well, it's about convincing others that we have a right to our opinions, our position, and our plan. That actually is, on a list of 1 to 4, the low-level influence. That is, okay, getting people to admit that, or say that, yeah, you have a right to your opinion. Don't worry about it. We're not going to oppose you. Your position, you have a right to it. That's as far as we're willing to go. You have a right to it. We're not willing at this stage to do anything else. We're just going to allow you to hold your position. But if we want to make that a little bit more effective, we have the issue of convincing people to consider the merits of our opinion, position, or plan, even if they don't agree with it. Not only do you have a right to your opinion, but okay, there's something there. I don't buy it, but there's something there, all right? And I'm willing to consider that. So you have a right to your opinion, and okay, there's some merit here. But then the next level, making the influence process a little bit more difficult, is getting people to support us in pursuing our opinion, position, or plan, even if it's not theirs. Oh, now we've entered into a world of interpersonal relationships that become very complex. Sure, you have a right to your opinion. Okay, your opinion or position has certain merit. Yeah, okay, I can support it, but you know what? It's not mine. It's not my position. But I'm willing to consider supporting you if I have to. There's that if I have to. But then, at the top of that pyramid of influencing and convincing others is getting people to agree with us. Now that is where we enter into a whole new challenge, if you will, and the difficulty of getting agreement along the line. So, that leads to the question, so how do I influence others? What's the process? What's involved in that? And by the way, it is a process. There are steps, there are tools that we can use in order to convince others, and that's what I would like us to look at this point. Among those tools are something as straightforward as communication. But the other side of this particular tool is reasoning skills. And that's when you discover that we all are not rational in the same way. We don't reason in the same way. You encounter something like this the minute you go into a different culture. Right? We Westerners think in a very rational, Cartesian way, scientific. We have theories, theorems, if you will. We test for the possibility, and so there's a logic to it. But not everybody thinks in those terms. An engineer thinks in terms of lines and boxes. Right? I don't think in terms of lines and boxes. I think in terms of circles. Circles have no beginning, no end, but they keep going around and around and around. All right? So engineers and I tend to have different ways of looking at the world. All right? So that whole reasoning skill set has a fairly multi-sided, multi-dimensional approach to it. So what is being suggested here is that we think logically. I just said, recognize not everybody thinks logically the same way. Not as easy as it looks. Analyze a problem. Identify the logical solutions to them. Analyze and display data visually. This is why I always push for make it visible. Look at it. Put the words on a flip chart so that we can pick it apart and begin to discuss it, analyze it. Ask insightful questions that lead others to look at the problem or the issue in real ways. So it's not just asking questions, do you understand, but asking questions in such a way as, can you tell me what you think this is about? Get people to respond. So there's the communication reasoning skills, recognizing that there's difficulty involved in that. Another set of skills is assertiveness. This looks like it's a little easier. We can be assertive in our position and get people to follow us, but sometimes that's not about convincing them, that's about forcing them. So you gotta be careful about this one. So these sets of skills are, okay, we present our ideas strongly and affirmatively. Why? Because we actually have the self-confidence in what we're saying. This actually is a dimension of self-confidence. It's maintaining our position without becoming aggressive. So there's assertive versus aggressive. It's about having faith in your own judgment, abilities, and rights. That is, be self-confident in your position and what you are dealing with. So being assertive is not about being aggressive, but it is about being self-confident. Interpersonal skills. Oh, okay, everybody talks about interpersonal skills. Well, what does that mean? Be engaged in others, not just with them. In other words, where are they coming from? Develop an understanding of them and their position. When they are communicating and then retain their ideas, because they have ideas. Mind them for what it is they're thinking, what their ideas are. Convey trust. Trust in them, not just trust in yourself, in order to cause them to feel that you are able to be trusted. The way in which we become trustworthy is by trusting others, not just simply saying I'm trustworthy. The other is to convince people to help you influence others. So we begin to recruit. All right? So there's that interpersonal. We need you, I need you, help me. Interactive skills. Mediate differences of opinion. So whether there are arguments or whatever, but there are always going to be differences of opinion. Try to reach a solution, not necessarily consensus. Consensus is a little different, but at least reach a conclusion or a solution that others can begin to accept and support. Discuss terms and reach a satisfactory agreement in a settlement or a bargain or a deal. Well, working with others is about coming up with a deal. Compromise of various sorts. And then identify core issues, find creative and mutually acceptable solutions. So how do we begin to influence others? Communication, reasoning skills, assertiveness, interpersonal skills, interactive skills. Having said that, this is really a fairly busy chart around, and it's a random listing, if you will, of influencing skills. So I'm not going to highlight all of it, but some of it is pretty interesting. So one way of influencing others is to see alternatives. My position may be my position, but you know what? It's always open to an alternative position that is worth looking at. Listen to others. I call this active listening, because it's not just about listening, it's about hearing what it is that they're saying, being receptive, if you will. Not just talking at them. It's about building rapport and trust. Trust is key. You can't influence others unless they trust you and you trust them. State your opinion with confidence. Don't be wishy-washy about it. Present your ideas strongly and affirmatively, not aggressively. Maintain your position without becoming aggressive, which is what I just said. Behave self-confidently. Build some kind of consensus, which is not always easy, by the way. Mediate differences. Behave authoritatively. Now, this is interesting. Behave authoritatively is not the same as behaving with authority. Okay? Behaving with authority is somewhat positional. I have the authority to do this, therefore you're going to do it. Behaving authoritatively is, this is the rational approach in which we should take. It's reasonable for us to go down this road. And by the way, here are the benefits. To you, to you, to you, and to you. Therefore, I'm behaving authoritatively, but not necessarily with authority. There are subtleties here. open up to and encourage and engage with people. Have insight into what others value. So once again, it's not about what you think that's important, it's about what you think they think. It's also about where their values are. Trying to come to a meeting ground. Have a strong, inclusive understanding of other people and what's important to them, and then finally, bargain and negotiate. So come to that compromise. I mean, there's nothing worse than being hardbound about your position. This is the only way to go. Well, no, it isn't. There's no such thing as the only way to go. All right? Let's find out if there are other alternatives, and then how can we come to a compromise in order to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. Because the goal is more important than what it is I'm saying or how we get there. So, once again, a series of tools. How do we put tools into our toolbox? There are 4 steps that have been identified, again through an organization like both MIT and Harvard Business. And there are 4 steps to influencing others to get them to follow us. Awareness, interest, trial, and acceptance. Or adoption, if you will. So, what are they? Let's look at them a little more closely. So, first thing to do is to raise awareness. We're challenging people's old routines, which is not easy to do because that's their comfort zone. Proposing new ideas, plans, and actions. Trying to create a new comfort zone, not easy to do. Inspire interest. So awareness, interest. But we're inspiring interest. Make them curious about your proposals. Move them to be more open to new information. Curiosity is a fascinating thing. One has to cultivate that. It isn't something that's just ordinary, other than with children. I don't know, those of us who have children, especially when they were much, much younger, it's actually the first 5 years that are the curiosity years. You watch their eyes, begin to take into the whole world. They cannot put words because they don't know the words, but they are looking, they're learning, and they're curious. Unfortunately, as we grow up, we lose that curiosity, but we should actually try to regain it. Conduct a trial. So if we really want to prove the worth of our position, let's try it. Get people to experiment with our proposals, and by the way, experimentation will lead to a compromise, I'm sure. And assess the benefits and potential successes. And then, of course, motivate adoption. Motivate people to replace the old routines with your new ideas, and get them to advocate and champion your initiative. How do we leverage support? And this is interesting, because in reality, we have to leverage support, whether we are in command positions or we're in only influence positions. We still have to leverage. It doesn't come automatically just because we happen to stand up and say, boom, this is what we're going to do. And there are different kinds of leveraging. There are support actions that we can take that have minimum disruptive impacts on the company. Then there are kinds of things that we can advocate that have moderate disruptive impact. And then there are things that we can advocate, if you will, that have high disruptive impact. So a minimum disruptive impact series of activities would be hold a meeting, have a coalition of support, tell success stories. This is where we can go, this is what it's going to look like. Present progress reports, conduct interviews, talk to people, and then potentially get executive support. Things that are moderately disruptive in terms of the organization, well, we have to sit down and reevaluate and clarify our values. We've got to recognize the value of the adopter and the position that that adopter takes. We have to build skills. We have to conduct a pilot project. This becomes somewhat disruptive in the ordinary sense of the term, but high disruptive activity would be, let's reconstruct the firm. Okay, Let's restructure everything. Well, there's a major destructive and disruptive approach to change. Or we're going to create a new reward system. Or we're going to set new deadlines and goals. So many of these actions require credibility on our part, credibility as a change agent. All right? Never mind as a change initiator, which in itself has certain values. So the other thing is to try to look at how others see us. What are their reactions to us? And what's been identified, and we have several different lists here that we'll look at on perception. There's legitimate, rewarder, coercive, expert, referent is what that is. So people looking at us say, well, we're legitimate in our position and in our ability and capability to influence us because it's anchored in a position of authority. It's not about command, but because you are in a position of authority, I'm willing to listen to you. We are rewarders. We promise or grant rewards because I'm going to reward you, therefore you're going to listen to me. We're coercive, okay? We use threats and we actually use punishment, okay? That's one way of influencing people, not necessarily the best way. And we're going to rank these in terms of their effectiveness. We're experts. There is that great value in being the well-informed and the knowledgeable. So we're experts. Wow, I'm going to listen to that expert and that expert's expertise. I may listen to it critically, but I'm still going to listen. And then, of course, referent, or referent, if you will, which is a very difficult word to say, so I apologize. Referent is really about charisma. It's about that personality. Look at that person. Wow. Every word that comes out of his or her mouth, I'm willing to follow. And I don't know about you, but we've all met people like this. You walk into a room and you know exactly who the shining light is, no matter how they're dressed or what it is that they say. And so what are the impacts or outcomes of these tactics? Well, legitimate and a legitimate person or a rewarder is someone who will produce only temporary support. And that in itself is interesting. There have been major studies on these. If you're coercive in your approach, you'll produce a temporary support, but a lot of resentment that will go with it, which undermines that support. If you're expert and referent, it produces enduring results and generates a lot of commitment. There have been very big studies on this, and we're going to look at those, or some of them. There are 9 influencing tactics that we can take, all right? And this is fascinating because it comes from psychology research. And what's fascinating about this is how these 9 are ranked according to their frequency of use. How often are they used in the workplace or anywhere else for that matter, in society generally? What has been the reaction in terms of resistance? What is the opposition to the use of this particular tactic or any particular tactic? How much compliance has been generated in using any of these particular tactics? And does any of that compliance actually lead to commitment? Now, compliance is one thing, commitment is totally different. And what's fascinating is the highest and the lowest, right? These 9 tactics are personal persuasion, or rational persuasion, I should say, a legitimating, there's an authority position, personal appeals, exchange, ingratiation, pressure, coalitions, inspirational appeals, and consultation. We're going to go through each one of those and do a little more analysis as to what constitutes those. Well, what's fascinating is which are the strong ones and which are the weak ones, depending on how you define strong or weak. So, rational persuasion, it's the most frequently used of all tactics to influence people. But it's not very successful because look at the high resistance, 47% reaction to using rational persuasion. You think it would be pretty straightforward. No, people do not like rational persuasion. They resist it, and there's a reason for it, and we'll look at that. Compliance is okay. Commitment is not that great, which is even more interesting. Pressure. There's the one that everybody is more familiar with than most. It's actually not used that frequency, only 6% of the time. So you think, wow, that's interesting. But when you do use it, the resistance goes straight through the ceiling. And rightly so. Well, why would anybody just say, geez, I just love being beaten up by somebody? I love being pressured. Compliance, you don't get that much. You actually don't get, well, actually you do get compliance and commitment because people are afraid. Commitment might not be the right word there, but people are afraid. Another one is that inspirational appeal. You know, oh, I'm being inspired by this person. It's not used very frequently. We don't necessarily know how to use inspiration. It's not a defect or a default. It's just not that easy to do. Resistance is 0. So think about the impact of being inspirational. Compliance is at 10%, but commitment is 90%. So if we can inspire people to go forward with change or whatever, we will get people lining up to follow us and be committed to that change. That's what this study is saying, which is interesting. So it's the Journal of Applied Psychology is where this comes from. So having said that, let's look at some of this. Let's unpack it a little. So rational persuasion is the ability to convince someone with reason, logic, and facts. You'd say, well, this should be straightforward. Everybody is reasonable. Everybody has logic. Everybody, will agree to the facts. Well, I'll go back to my opening statements, and that is precisely the opposite. Not everybody thinks in the same way. Not everybody is logical in the same way. Not everybody will accept the facts in the same way. Facts are not necessarily absolute facts. And so it works well when when those influence actually think in the same way. They're not open to emotional appeals, they're open to a rational appeal. And some of the guidelines, if we want to use this, is state why you need something. State how the others will benefit. What's in it for me? Provide valid evidence, know what you're talking about. Give pros and cons, identify potential problems and how to deal with them. Be prepared, be ready to defend your ideas with any that may be in opposition or this is Spock. That's it. I can't do that. Sorry. It doesn't work. But this is Spock's approach. Okay? Inspirational appeals. Tap into values, emotions. This is an emotional approach to things. I believe in this. Effective inspiration appeals to authentic, personal, big thinking, and enthusiastic approaches. So describe how your request appeals to the target's values. So you have to know the other people. Describe how your request is related to the vision of the future. Use expressive, optimistic, positive language. It's about success. This is an interesting picture. Success is about work, improving, focus, passion, pushing, serving. It's about ideas, and it's about persistence despite the fact that you face CRAP. Actually, it's up in the corner there, CRAP. And CRAP is very interesting. It's criticism, it's rejection, it's assholes, and pressure. We all face crap. You can define it that way or any other way. But in reality, we know that it's true. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't persist. Consultation. It's about asking others to work with us in order to influence others. It's recruiting people to be on our side. It allows others to have perceived and real interest in the decision. It also is most effective in organizations that are somewhat democratic in their approach. It's about engagement. Ingratiation. This is a very interesting tool that may or may not be successful. One's going to be very careful about this one. There's more danger involved sometimes in ingratiation than anything else. It's about making others feeling good about themselves. It's going to be very patronizing. You got to be very careful about this one, because it includes any form of flattery done either before, during, or after an attempt to influence others. It's about smiling. It's about eye contact. It's about being so agreeable. It's about what I do when I'm in China, I haven't a clue what the heck they're saying, and I just smile and nod. And they think I know what they just said, and I haven't a clue. But hey, it's ingratiating. Besides, they don't really care. So you move along there. So it's about, if you do it effectively, you've got to be honest about it. You can't use it all the time, all right? It's about impressing people. How do we impress people? It's an ingratiating aspect. And it's something that we see all the time, and it's more and more frequent in an e-commerce context. If you bought these bananas, guess what? Other people also bought these things too. If you bought this book, guess what? Other people were reading these books. It's trying to influence by saying, oh, look, you're part of a much bigger picture because you're interested in this item. So that's what ingratiation, that's how it comes out in ads and especially in an e-commerce context. Personal appeals, helping another person because we like them, okay? We enjoy saying yes. It's an emotional thing. It's a personal emotions, and it's also a social dimension to it. It's about safety, humor, happiness, self-esteem, comfort, ambition. It's about recognition, respect, involvement, affiliation, acceptance, and approval. And you're asking for a personal favor, basically. And it's actually looking at what this is called the emotional color wheel, okay? And it's fascinating because joy and trust may actually support love. Fear and surprise, actually trust and fear, it's about submission. Fear and surprise is about awe. Surprise and sadness is about disappointment, right? Sadness and disgust is about remorse. Disgust and anger is about contempt. Anger and anticipation is about aggression. Anticipation and joy is about optimism. To recognize that we as humans are multidimensional, just in our emotions. So there's the color wheel. So in a personal appeal, we have to really know where people are in terms of that color spectrum. Exchange. It's a transaction in which someone does something for you and you do something for them. It's the social contract. It's what we call reciprocation, right? And basically it is a social contract. I won't kill you, therefore you're not going to kill me. That's what the social contract is. Doesn't mean I'm going to support you, it just means I won't kill you. All right. Coalition. It's about bringing people together and using the collective in order to influence others. Sometimes this becomes unionized situations, okay? And what's interesting is this is the typical, one for all for one approach, but it can also be something like this, which I won't even mention. Dave can do whatever he wants with it. So, pressure. I mean, it's about forcing someone to do something. It's as simple as that. It's about threats. Using reminders. Threats can be very subtle, threats can be very straightforward, and it's about putting people under pressure. Getting them to crack, if you will. Legitimating. Very unfortunate word. It's about having position power. And this tactic is about getting compliance. We have a rule, we have to do it this way. This is the way it goes. And basically, it's the authority pyramid. There are the people at the top, and there are those who are under, therefore we obey and we comply. But authority is actually a little more complex than that pyramid. It really does have multiple dimensions to it. Because authority could be referent, it could be expertise authority, it could be reward authority, coercive authority, position authority, or longevity authority. And one can look at these in a little more detail in order to get a sense of their multidimensional dynamics in terms of authority. When we think of authority, my strong suggestion is don't just think in terms of title, because we exercise authority in multiple ways. There's also the direction of influence. We think we just influence. Well, no, actually we don't. We have people we report to, we have people who report to us, and we have peers on either side. And you use different tactics in order to influence them in different ways. This is how sophisticated this becomes. It becomes an action plan. So rational persuasion, the target often enough is superiors, people we report to. And you do so at an initial request, not throughout the whole process. And you might get some kind of positive response. Inspirational appeals, well, that actually works with people who report to you rather than people you report to. You don't need a clear pattern around that, but the odds of success are very high. Consultation, it's really about dealing with subordinates or people who report to you plus people you work with, peers. You don't need a clear pattern, and again, the success might be very high. Ingratiation, it's both peers and subordinates again, but you only do it at the beginning. You've got to be careful about ingratiation. You don't do it throughout the whole process. And by the way, be prepared for a lukewarm response. Exchange, you work you use that tactic with subordinates and peers, and it's immediate follow-up, and it's low to medium response or success rate. Personal appeal, you do that with peers. You go to your friends, people, your co-workers, you say, we've got to do this, but you do it only at the beginning. You don't do it throughout the whole process. And you may get a lukewarm, it depends. Notice how a lot of this is not all that successful in achieving what you want to achieve. Coalition, peers and superiors, long-term follow-up, success might be low. Pressure, definitely with your subordinates, people who report to you, that's the most effective. You're not going to try to pressure your boss. Long-term follow-up, you got to be careful of where that might go. And legitimating is with people who report to you and your peers, and it's immediate in the follow-up, and success may be relatively low. So once again, in order of successful outcomes, upward influence, use rational persuasion. Downward influence, rational persuasion, inspiration, pressure, consultation, ingratiation, exchange, and legitimating, in that order. Lateral influence, rational persuasion seems to be across the board in all of them. More consultation, then ingratiation, exchange, legitimating, personal appeals, and coalitions. So this is a tool set that you could use in differentiating how and what you would do. I'm not going to go through this in any great detail, but there are influencing behaviors that go with each one of these. So influencing up, you bring to this solutions, not problems. I don't know about how you actually deal with your bosses, but one of the things you don't do is to say, we've got a problem, and then stop. Is to say, we've got a problem, and oh, by the way, here's what I suggest we do. In other words, solutions. Influencing down, it's really about modeling behavior. That's the top one. Influencing across, it's about being collaborative, being easy to work with. And then there are a whole series of other ones around that. And in summary, really, influence is the ability to affect the behaviors of others in a particular direction. It's the power of influence is the potential and capacity to affect that behavior. And a leader's influence outcomes of commitment, compliance, or resistance are really a function of how you use the tactic. Some influence tactics are ethical. Some are not. Some are just simply neutral. You have to determine, given the context, which one applies in terms of judging the influence tactic. And the most effective influence tactics are rational persuasion, inspirational appeal, and consultation. The least effective are pressure, coalition, and appealing to legitimate authority. Sequencing is as important as direction. Direction is as important as sequencing. You don't use all of the arrows in your quiver, shoot them all at the same time, all in the same direction, all at the same people. You go absolutely nowhere if you do that. And then you have no weapons to defend yourself. Leadership is an invitation to greatness that we extend to others.